Welcome back, everybody. It's Dan's Monsters here with another Dan's Monster Pod. A look into all the things that have influenced the monster stuff that I make. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a true classic, a film that's haunted me since childhood, Night of the Demon from 1957. This was always on the BBC horror double bill when I was a kid. We used to watch them on a black and white TV in our bedroom, usually a Hammer film and then an old black and white 40s movie, 50s movie. And it is an absolute classic movie and a classic folk horror movie, probably before the term was really invented. And one that deserves a rewatch or even a first watch if you've never seen it. Go find it. It's wonderful. Now, I'll go through a bit of the sort of ins and outs of the making of the film because not a lot of people know sort of the history behind it. Certainly if you've never seen it, and even that background is very interesting. There are two versions of the film. Curse of the Demon was the American release, shorter than the British version for some reason. Night of the Demon with a slightly different edit. Though not a significant commercial success on its initial release, Night of the Demon has become a highly acclaimed film by critics and filmmakers in retrospect, and is considered, and I would agree, one of the greatest horror films of all time. It's a British-made movie directed by Jacques Tourneur, starring American star Dana Andrews, Peggy Cummins, and a wonderful British actor called Niall McGuinness. And the storyline is about an American psychologist who travels to England to investigate a satanic cult that is suspected to be involved in some deaths. Now, Tourneur's film is based on Casting of the Runes, which is by a short story by Montague Rhodes James, a Cambridge Don and medievalist and probably the greatest writer of ghost stories ever, M.R. James. And it would continue some years later, perhaps, with the M.R. James adaptations for the Ghost Stories for Christmas. M.R. James is just a gold mine of great ghost, creepy horror stories. If you've never read him, I highly recommend. Like Tourneur, James was famous for stories that relied on mood and language to hint at horrible lurking things in the shadows, glimpsed but never revealed. Now, I'm not going to go into too much details because I don't want to ruin the story, but the brief synopsis of the film is an American psychologist, John Holden, played by Dana Andrews, is visiting Britain for a conference. He's a skeptic of all things new supernatural, but then he's drawn into the intrigue surrounding an increasingly famous supernatural writer and researcher, Julian Carswell, who's played by Niall McGuinness. And then through various reasons, he then figures out that this guy can actually summon demons with the passing of a set of runes, and he has the power to shut down his critics. And then the film becomes a race against time because obviously Carswell is now after Andrews or John Holden. It's wonderful, wonderful. This is a cracker of an early British horror movie, and it used to scare the living daylights out of me. It stuck in my head for years, and the noises and the look and the whole thing is just great. The demon design is fantastic, which caused a lot of controversy because it's seen at the start and at the end of the movie. And this itself caused considerable animosity between the director, the writer who adapted the tale, Charles Bennett, and the producer, Hal E. Chester. And things apparently got so bad at one point, Dana Andrews threatened to leave the picture if Hal Chester didn't let the director direct the picture. And I'm quoting him directly there. Chester wanted to show the demon at the start, but the writer and the director did not. However, these decisions were taken away from those two because after the film was made and completed shooting, they just weren't asked, and Chester just did it anyway. Tourneur just wanted to show footsteps of the demon at the start and show the demon in full shape towards the end. He was incredibly unhappy, and as was the screenwriter, who was so angry he said he would shoot Chester if he ever walked up his own drive. And interviewed in 1965, Tourneur's opinion was, they ruined the film by showing it from the very beginning with a guy we don't know opening his garage who doesn't interest us in the least. Now, I can understand why I would be furious about it. Personally, I don't think it really makes a lot of difference for me, even when I watch it now. But as a director with a vision, it must have been massively infuriating. But the more of that demon, the better for me, because even though it's quite an old movie, it looks fantastic. It was originally to be designed by Ray Harryhausen, but he was so busy on the seventh voyage of Sinbad, he just didn't have the time to do it. So the design went to a German production designer called Ken Adam. I'll put a link to a quick interview with him in the notes. It was part puppet, part man in suit, and even at the time, people said the special effects were considered brilliant. And Adam based the design on sort of ancient old wood carvings, and I think it's a wonderful and instantly recognisable to any horror fan. If you ask a horror fan about it, what's that from? Oh, it's from Night of the Demon, or if you're in America, Curse of the Demon. It's a brilliant thing. All the big horror books would always have a massive photo of it in, and it was just a terrifying looking beast. And certainly when it appears, certainly at the end, in its wisps of smoke eventually emerging, giant and snarling and dripping fangs and these eyes glaring, it's a terrifying sight. Just as a side note, Ken Adam went on to design James Bond villains' lures. There you go. Now, Dana Andrews, who's the American actor who was put in this film, he was getting towards the end of his career at this point, and apparently he was pretty much an alcoholic. However, he's absolutely perfect in this role as this rational man. And Peggy Cummins, she went on to Hollywood but didn't make a career out of it. Returned to the UK and had a relatively successful career until the 60s. And she used to appear at special screenings of the films many years later. Now, Neil McGuinness is the greatest, though. He's an absolutely cracking character. He was relatively well known within the British film industry anyway, but his character of Carswell he plays magnificently. And apparently, M.R. James had based him on, of course, Satanist Aleister Crowley. He plays Carswell as this charming grandparent figure at first, but then morphs into this evil, dark character, obsessed with his own power over the demonic ways. And in the beginning, it's a fantastic bit where he appears dressed as a clown, entertaining the local kids. And he then decides to show a bit of power, and all these kids are having fun eating cake and having a good laugh, and he then decides to turn it on its head and brings a storm into play, and it trashes the kids' party, and all the kids are in tears, and he's just wandering around going, oh yes, no. He's just really just evil. And the settings, which include Brocket Hall in Herefordshire, which was Lufford Hall, which is Carswell's home. You've got Stonehenge, of course, Brickwood Railway Station, which doesn't exist anymore, and the Reading Room of the British Museum. And of course, the England we see, because it is set in England, is the old England, old with an E, England of charming villages and of church communities and of local pubs and of hedgerows and trees and open fields and farmers and corner shops and people talking in old accents, still believing in ancient pagan horrors, still doing the maypole dancing and the traditional fairs, just this fantastic old version of England that Dana Andrews is so out of place, but brilliantly acted because he's meant to be out of place. The other thing I've got to mention is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was composed by a chap called Clifton Parker. They did hundreds, over 50 scores to his name in the movies, including Treasure Island for 1950. Yeah, Disney's 1950 Treasure Island. And a lot of other documentaries. Brilliant. But his thing for the Night of the Demon was these horrible little far-off tweeting noises that got louder and louder as the demon started to get closer and closer. And it's this horrible little noise that just sticks in your head. It's fantastic. Oh, and of course, don't forget that Kate Bush used the beginning of the film to sample in her song Hounds of Love in 1985. It's in the trees, it's coming. I'll try and put that in. That's from that film. So, I mean, wow, what a thing, yeah? So there you go, guys. I think if you haven't seen Night of the Demon, or Curse of the Demon if you're in America, you need to get hold of it. Have a look, pick up a copy for relatively cheap. You might even get it on YouTube, to be fair. It is an absolute masterclass in old horror filmmaking. And like I said, that demon itself is just amazing design. So if you're into your special effects and you're into your monsters, it is a must watch. I'm going to tell you right now. Anyway, my voice is going. Oh dear me, hang on. I just want to say thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. My ramblings as usual about these sort of things that influence me. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another tale. If you fancy, you can find me obviously on dansmonsters.podbean.com or on most podbeany podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you do enjoy the show, please leave a review. It'd mean a lot. Let me know what you think. I'd be really interested. I'll put all the links in the description, but keep an eye on my socials for updates. Although, to be fair, I'm not on Twitter or Facebook, so Instagram. But you can find all the latest stuff on, of course, Substack, because everybody's got a Substack now. dansmonsters.substack.com, and you can check out my website, dansmonsters.com. If you'd like to support me in any way, which I would be very much appreciative of, you can do so at ko-fi.com/dansmonsters. Now, if you want to see me make some stuff, draw, how I do it, how I sculpt stuff, and even more rambling nonsense, you can see the videos over at youtube.com/themonsterbomb club. I go through all the sorts of techniques that I use for my art and talk about, again, some of the stuff that's influencing me at that time and some of the artists that I love. I also do my pulp horror, sci-fi, fantasy reviews over at libraryofdoom.medium.com. There's over 30 reviews on there at the moment. If you fancy taking a look at some of the trashy books that I've been reading over the years, go and have a look. And of course, a huge shout out to the awesome Myths and Monsters for letting me use their tracks from their epic album Cecilia for this podcast. You can find them on Instagram at myths_and_monsters. And you can check their music out on mythsandmonsters.bandcamp.com. Absolutely magnificent stuff. Go buy some stuff of them. Brilliant. And of course, not sponsored, but I always like to give Paul a shout out. My jitter juice for the early morning recordings is from Black Worship Coffee. Go check them out on Instagram. Go check the website out. They're just wonderful and they keep you going. All sorts of different stuff. I'm drinking Nordic black coffee at the moment. It's great. Okay, that's it, guys. I'll be back here in a couple of weeks, like I said. Check everything out. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And stick around for the closing time and enjoy the epic tunes of Myths and Monsters. See you guys. Bye!